Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to another WorkTripp Introducing and Future of Teams session. I'm delighted today to be joined by Stephen Janaway, who is the VP of Engineering at Bloom & Wild, the largest direct-to-consumer flower brand in Europe, where Stephen's helping to reconnect more people thoughtfully through technology. So welcome, Stephen. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
Thank you. We were just chatting. So Storm Kiran, I'm not belittling it in any way because I know it has been difficult for some people, but my two children are currently off school and nursery, and there's a sort of slight breeze outside. So that's the contextual setting for today's recording, just in case listeners and viewers wanted that extra bit of feedback. But to kick off into today's session, perhaps you could start, Stephen, with a little bit of an intro into who you are and what you do on a sort of day-to-day basis.
Yeah, certainly. It's actually really interesting. Actually, you mentioned like setting the scene here. One of the things we do when we start meetings in Bloom & Wild is we have a little check-in just to kind of see how people are and how they're turning up. I think it really helps the engagement in those sorts of sessions. So anyway, I'm the VP Engineering of Bloom & Wild, and so as VP Engineering, it means I lead the engineering team. So the engineering team in a software context, that's the team that builds, maintains the software and solutions that effectively power the business. So we are an online e-commerce company effectively, and so for us that means our website, our mobile apps, our back-end e-commerce and fulfillment platforms. So basically everything that the business relies on in order to send everyone beautiful flowers.
And we were just not only flowers, but we were just also singing the praises of the wonderful cocktails that are available on Bloom & Wild, of which this week, must have had Bloom & Wild in mind, because I did use the app to send some flowers and cocktails, which are winging their way to someone this week. So that's always worth everyone knowing as well.
Yeah, very pleased to hear that. Yes, that's an extension of our three brands there. We're moving and expanding outside of just the core flower market, certainly towards other gifts. We do some very nice brownies as well. Very much recommend having a look at those.
Good to know. Fabulous. So, I mean, I've got here, I came across your work, I think it was in July when Agile on the Beach was on this year. Awesome event. And I really connected with what you and your colleague were talking around in terms of keeping engagement high when teams go remote. And so I was like, we must get Stephen onto the podcast to talk about what you shared during that session. So could you sort of summarize, what the main themes were during that session? And then we can kind of dig into, how anything may have changed since July as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, what myself and Ella, one of the engineering managers at Bloom & Wild, talked about is we talked about a story effectively of what happened when the pandemic hit and we went from being a fully office-based company, so of around about 100 people, to fully remote overnight, and then we made 2 company acquisitions during the pandemic while we were all fully remote. We had our largest ever peak Mother's Day period ever during that period, and we scaled the team up. And so after we were able to return to the office, Bloom & Wild made the decision to do what we call our flexible working policy. So there's no obligation for anybody to be in an office, but we have 2 offices, one in the UK and one in the Netherlands, that our employees can return to on a frequency that works for them. We also, this is particularly within technology, we have a significant proportion. So 30% of our team are fully remote. So either fully remote within the UK or the Netherlands, or in other countries across Europe as well. And so we talked about that as a kind of as a construct, and then some of the activities we've done, and particularly something we call Squads Assemble, which we believe brings high engagement and brings the teams together, and means that we can bridge this remote and flexible kind of almost like gap we have, and try and make sure that we've got an engaged team when it's not like it used to be when we were all sat next to each other for 5 days a week. We could all connect and kind of pick up on different signals from each other, and therefore be a kind of tight unit. And I think what's kind of what was really key for us is making sure that we had these opportunities. So these squads assembles, they're quarterly, and they're effectively where we give time, space, and I guess encouragement and support to our managers. So to our engineering managers, like Ella, who was my co-presentee, to bring everybody from their squad together. So a squad to us means a team, effectively. So a squad will be a group of engineers who, and supported by an engineering manager and a product manager, who will be responsible for a part of the customer journey. So for example, we have a checkout and payment squad. So when you've found a beautiful bouquet and you've put it in the basket and you want to put all the details in and then you want to give us your money, it's that bit of the tech stack that squad would own. So it's all about how we get those engineers in that squad together regularly, and some of the activities that we encourage the engineering managers use during those sessions to kind of keep the engagement high.
And I think that's so interesting. So I'd love to get into, you know, where you meet, how you define, you know, the purpose of why you're going to meet as well. But before we get into that, is there something particular to the fact that you're the engineering department, which means that, you know, you have a sort of specific understanding of why there is this requirement? Because I feel like, generally speaking, it's engineering teams have sort of pioneered this way of working for a while anyway.
Yeah, I think it's become a hygiene. So remote working has become a hygiene factor, I think, particularly within software engineering. And so it's an expectation from a large number of engineers that would be an option. So we'd started pre-pandemic kind of testing the waters, hiring a couple of people that were remote, and we really ramped it up during the pandemic. And so consequently, I think there are more remote people in the technology team, for example, and the engineering team in Bloom and Wild as a percentage than there are in the rest of the company, which when you think about it kind of makes sense, because it's a lot easier to be able to do software development remotely. It's often the environment you can have at home in terms of being able to focus, and in a quiet environment suits that sort of knowledge work, as opposed to, for example, if you work in one of our fulfillment centers and you pack up our boxes, you clearly need to be in that fulfillment center. So I think it has been a more engineering and technology focused piece of work, because that's where the need has been, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And so if I'm a team leader listening in, I'm sure the question they'll be thinking is, you know, in your example, how do you go about setting up and thinking about those quarterly squad assembles? So, you know, the design around what they look like, how you think about, you know, is there a particular theme of pulling everyone together? And, you know, what does that look like in terms of the day-to-day experience of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think really high level, a framework we like to give the managers is to think about what sort of problems they're trying to solve. So we've used a convergent divergent thinking framework that really helps. So if you've got a convergent decision, that's where there's typically a single solution to something. So I think the example we gave in the presentation was around, you're in an office and the printer breaks. Your convergent solution to that problem is to phone up somebody and have them come around and fix the printer. One problem, one
solution. Kick the printer, but no, we won't.
Or kick. That's more of I'd argue that's more of a divergent solution. So a divergent solution is where there might be many different ways of solving a particular problem. So you might phone somebody up, you might kick the printer, for example. You may you may try and fix it yourself. Well, maybe kicking it is trying to fix it yourself. I don't know. But those divergent meetings are the ones that really benefit from being face-to-face. So that's where you might be creating new ideas. You might be doing imagination, brainstorming, and those sorts of meetings where you really need to get an idea of people's body language and kind of feed off that rather than just seeing or hearing what they say. So all those pieces that it's increasingly hard to get over a video call. And so we use that as a bit of a construct with the managers to say, well, if you're getting your team together, and make the most of it, because obviously getting a team together is not cheap for a start. It's an expensive activity to do, particularly when you've got people that are quite geographically dispersed. And so we get the managers to think about what's the best way of solving some of the problems, and things like sessions to do team building, sessions to do maybe reflection, whether it's retrospectives or feedback, or even we've started recently using them to do pre-mortems. So let's try and work out in this particular scenario what could go wrong. For example, we have a big peak period around Christmas. Lots of people buy flowers, lots of people buy little Christmas trees and things like that. So we could use one of these sessions to do a pre-mortem in a squad to say, okay, we are responsible for the fulfillment area. What could go wrong? What's the worst case scenario? What would be an awful Christmas? And then, okay, how can we think about actually putting things in place to make sure to mitigate these potential problems occurring? And we've also used them for planning, for aligning teams and people. We work on a quarterly heartbeat generally in our product planning cycle, and so they fit very nicely within that quarterly planning. But at its real heart, it's about making connections. So it's about getting people together and getting them to actually see each other rather than virtually see each other through a video call. So sometimes it's as simple as saying to a squad, well, what do you want to spend this time for? So we make some connections. And so sometimes some of that time is just spent, they just want to sit down and code next to each other. And that's fine, because that builds those connections. And then even if they don't see each other face to face for another 3 months, it's given them something to build on. And so they can take that forwards, and it can run for that 3-month period until they get back together again.
That's so interesting, because we have obviously lots of different teams, different sectors, but I have heard examples, and I know of one earlier in the year where it was an engineering team, and that example of sitting next to one another and coding is a real life thing that happens on offsites as well. So yeah, really, really fascinating.
I think it really works with something like that. And I think one other area we found, I mean, recently, for example, in our senior tech leadership team, we found really valuable is we spent a bit of this time going to one of our fulfillment centers and actually packing flowers and making those connections with the people outside of the technology team that use our technology. And we learned so much by that. And we also built some really good connections with people that were not in our team, but are really, really important stakeholders. So it's about kind of working, and it was fun. And that's the kind of key point with all of these things. You want to get.
Well, I remember your point from Agile on the Beach, which, you ended the session, because I was naturally thinking, okay, I'd love to hear from you what the feedback of these sessions, these squad assembles, quarterly get-togethers has been, because obviously pandemic was 2020 onwards. We're in 2023 as we record this. So what has the kind of feedback been from your team? And then I'm also curious to hear whether others in the business outside of the engineering team are sort of looking over the fence and saying, oh, actually, what are you doing? And can we bring any of that into our own
I think you froze a little bit there.
I'm back.
You're back. I can hear you. Hopefully everyone else can.
Did you catch my question, Steve?
Yes, I think it was about feedback and about how we've learned, or whether we've learned and applied this any more broadly than engineering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think feedback wise, I think we've had very good feedback from within the engineering team. So, like anything, when you make a big change like this, we conducted an experiment. So it's never sensible to go all in on these sorts of things. So we conducted an experiment for 2 quarters, and we looked at the feedback. A lot of the feedback from the engineers was very positive. It was about getting together. They were really valuing the connections that they made, and just getting to understand and know their co-workers. When we started doing these, a lot of people had never met face to face because we'd hired them in the pandemic, and so they'd always only had a virtual connection. But as they've begun to build that connection, then obviously every 3 months or so they're building on top of an established base, which I think works really well. In terms of how it works across the rest of our business, so we have a variety of different options for different teams. So some teams are fully co-located or choose to be fully co-located because effectively that there's optionality on how often you travel to our offices. So some teams actually are able to and value being co-located. Others have taken bits from these and run offsites, for example, in different countries. For example, in the Netherlands is where we've got some of our members of our team, and to run an offsite in the Netherlands is really valuable because you get to go to the Netherlands, you get to visit the flower farms, you get to see other parts of the business, and you get a connection to the brand in a different way. So I think there have been elements that have been taken out of Squads Assemble and used in other parts of the business too. We make sure that we are very much sharing different approaches, so that effectively managers, irrespective of which team they're in, they've got like a recipe book of options, and they pick the one that's going to suit their particular team and their context the best.
I love as well that we hear about our customers bringing customers to their offsites to sort of contextualize their work and their purpose. But I absolutely love what you said about getting into the on the ground facilities that are behind this brand, and then also going to the flower farm. So like the experiential setting, I absolutely love that. It's fantastic. So I've got a question here. Why do you find it important for people to see or feel, this is from Sally, body language, etc., for divergent team interaction? So what is it about seeing or feeling the body language that you think is really important?
Oh, firstly, thank you, Sally, for the question. So I think so much of how we interact as humans is not by what we say. It's about that body language piece, and it is intrinsically harder over a video call to get that. For a start, you can't see the whole of somebody, and that's actually really quite important. And equally, we sit closer to our cameras than we would to somebody face to face. So, and that can sometimes make video calls actually harder and like cognitively more difficult. And therefore, being in a space and being able to be, I guess, an appropriate distance away from people, being able to pick up on all of that different body language is really valuable. It's also really valuable because, like it or not, there is always a temptation when you're sat on a video call to be paying 3/4 of attention to the video call. And because there are so many other options that could distract you, you could be getting like Slack or chat messages or whatever, and you could just go away and do that thing. Whereas if you're in a room together and you're doing something really engaging, you bring your whole self to that. And that means you do pay more attention to others. And when you pay more attention to others, you do pick up on more of those little kind of visual body language type cues that you wouldn't get if you were just on a video call. So I think both are important. There's a time and a place for both, but that's certainly some of the things that we value by having people together every once in a while.
I love that. And what we noticed on our own offsites as well is that we were reflecting that during our own sort of strategic sessions, when an idea went up and people were really enthusiastic about that, there was like a natural almost step towards that idea physically. and actually when people are a bit more hesitant or not convinced, you know, you can see that in the body language and it's more closed. So, you know, it's just I suppose a lot of that we take for granted. It's sort of subconscious, but yeah, when you don't have that, it's sort of removing one of those signals for how people are picking up on ideas, which can be a challenge, I think.
Yeah, it can be. And I think also you get by getting people together on every say 3 months, for example, and getting them really focused on something, they also learn more how to pick up on some of those cues that probably are visible over a call, but they just haven't really picked up on because they haven't really been in a room with somebody and they haven't really got the full picture of how somebody kind of shows up and kind of what those cues for them, their own kind of personal cues are. So it really builds in that engagement piece.
So we got Nini absolutely underlying that. People don't remember what you say, but how you made them feel. And 70%, I think, of our non-verbal communication comes from our body language. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely the stat I've heard as well. Yeah, so I'd absolutely agree with that.
And so Steve, we ask everyone on this podcast, like, what are your top tips for creating a great team connection experience? So whether that's an offsite, whether it's a squad assemble in the office or a different, you know, visiting your, you know, those flower fields that you mentioned. So what do you think are the top elements of creating that connection experience?
Yeah, I think the primary one, and this is particular, like think about what people miss, think about what people don't get through a call. And I mean, this was particularly important when we began to bring people back together again, or in some cases together for the first time because they had never been together. So think about what people miss. I think plan those sorts of activities that will build the connections, whether it's around kind of team building activities, retrospectives, health checks, or even sitting down together and coding together. And think about which ones are going to really make people feel valuable and valued. I think that's really, really important. So, and a really good way of doing that is just ask your team what they want to do, and because I'm sure they want to meet each other, and I'm sure they want to do things, and they want to have some fun, and they want to feel like, particularly if they've had to travel quite a long way and it's been quite temporarily disruptive to them, they want to go home and feel like that was time well spent. And I think the final kind of really, really important point is, as an organizer of these sorts of things, it can be really easy to just feel like all the pressure's on you to make sure they have a good time. Whereas I think trying to find ways that you can share the load with a team when you're organizing some sort of offsite activity is really, really important. Don't think about like, this is all on me, all the pressure is on me. Work out ways that you can engage people beforehand in the organization and maybe sharing out some of how it all works, and maybe not being the facilitator yourself for every piece of it also takes the pressure off you. Because if you're an engineering manager, for example, and with a squad and you bring them together, you're an important part of that. You want to be, you're there to build engagement and build connection. And if you're not looking forward to it because you're like, oh God, everyone's got to have a good time and I've got to get everybody together and I've got to do this and got to do that, you're not going to get at much personally out of it. And therefore it might be time well spent, but it's probably not time best spent, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. That's something that we absolutely see as well, is that, you know, too often those organizers within the company get sort of sucked in. They kind of come out the other side and they have a sigh of relief that things are done, but actually they haven't participated themselves. So completely see that. Got a few more minutes. So I suppose we touched upon, you know, I saw you present in July. You know, we've talked about that mode that you've come into this sort of quarterly frequency. I was really interested to find out if anything has changed since, you know, in the last couple of months, or like how that's evolved, I suppose, as well.
it's quite interesting actually. When I look outside of Bloom Wild in the last couple of months, there's definitely been an uptick in companies being far more vocal about how they're pulling people back to the office, or remote working is dead and stuff like that. And particularly in technology, for example, some of the much bigger companies, your Googles and Metas and Apples and so on, those that really kind of pay the big bucks and have the big leverage, they're all pulling people back and getting increasingly, I guess, tough about how they do it. That's not something we're doing. I think over the last couple of months, we've been working on how squads assembles fit with other activities that we think build engagement. So, for example, over the summer, we did a pilot to reduce the hours down a little bit. So something we called summer hours. So working 4.5-day weeks instead of 5, because sun's out. It wasn't actually that out this summer, was it? But the intention was, sun's out, we can all go and have a bit of a nice time, and we can build some sorts of ability to share what people have been doing. So there was still some sort of connection, and people could maybe learn a little bit more about, I don't know, I went on a long bike ride on a Friday afternoon, and they could ask me about bikes. So, but in terms of how the squads assembles work, we've got ourselves into what we feel is a good kind of pattern in terms of quarterly, focused on those different activities, those different pieces, and how a squad assemble works every quarter is sometimes different. So squads assembles at the moment, for example, getting the squads together, we're all ramping up to our peak period, which starts around Christmas. So a lot of the activities will be focused around kind of peaks prep, and what are we doing for peaks, and pre-mortems and things like that. And also just getting people kind of motivated and, I guess, emotionally ready for what's always a little bit more of a pressurized time of the year.
I feel like there's such a parallel to draw from the kind of company version of that to the personal. So everyone can relate to that on every level individually, I think, as well, the pressure of that period. So, yeah. And hearing that, thank you again, even more for taking the time to join this session. So just finally then, you're obviously doing a fabulous job at Bloom and Wild. You're bringing the team together, you're thinking about engagement. I remember back from July that one of your benchmarks is actually about just seeing in the team that they're happy, that they're engaged, and that's really important to you. I wondered who you draw inspiration from in terms of these same kinds of questions and challenges around engagement, team leadership, and that kind of thing. So are there any book authors, people projects, or podcasts that you love that you'd love to share with people listening in?
Yeah, I think there's one so Bruce Daisley's stuff is the one is my go-to. So he does a newsletter called Make Work Better, which it got quite a lot of kind of prominence in the pandemic around remote work. And I think there's always a temptation to sign up to too many newsletters and be overwhelmed. If you sign up to one, I would sign up to Make Work Better, because I think it's been for me a real into a lot of other different pieces of research, opinion pieces around particularly remote working and engagement with remote working and more flexible hybrid sort of working. He also does a podcast called Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, which is really, really good as well. So that will be my. I'm always wary of recommending too many, because you can drown under newsletters. But that's the guy in the podcast and the newsletter I'd really, really recommend if you're interested in this sort of stuff.
We're also a massive fan of that podcast and Bruce Daisley's work as well. So he's been on a previous podcast that we've been involved in, and his comments on developments that are happening are always incredibly well researched, as you said. So yeah, massive +1 to that vote. So on that note, Steve, I'm going to let you get back to your running up to the Christmas period, and thank you so much for sharing your work. It's been brilliant to get to know you. And have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thanks a lot. Take care.